you if you're okay with that. My name is Claudia Carco, and I'm the Interim Assistant Dean of English as a Second Language. English as a second language at Westchester Community College. As many of you know, our school is based in Valhalla, New York. This presentation is being sponsored, supported, and made possible by the Sophia and Joseph Abelese Endowed Chair for English as a Second Language. I'd like to thank our sponsors for their commitment to the professional development of English as a second language. Susan, I'm going to mute you. So please stay muted if you can. A special thanks goes to the New York State TESOL organization and its president, Ching Lin, who is unfortunately not able to join us this evening, but she shared this event with her members and has offered to give them CTLE credits or a certificate of participation. At the end of this session, we'll be sharing a link through the chat if you're a NICE TESOL member to apply for either. So make sure not to miss out on that. Finally, I'd like to thank my colleague and friend and the person who made this event possible. She worked tirelessly to get this going, Ms. Leslie Painter-Farrell. Leslie is currently running our TESOL certificate program and is the mastermind behind our speaker series that we started in October of last year. So a little housekeeping before we get started. During this presentation, we're going to ask everyone to please remain muted. If you're not muted, we're going to go in there and mute you. Don't take that personally. We just want to make sure that we give our speaker our full undivided attention. At the end of the session, we'll be doing a Q&A. So any questions that you have for our speaker, please go ahead and type them in the chat, and we'll make sure to ask them at the end of the session. And now to the reason why we're all here tonight, our guest of honor. I know he doesn't want this formal introduction, but if I had a red carpet, I would roll it out for him. He really doesn't need an introduction, as I'm sure all of you have studied his theories on language acquisition and language development. But he's a researcher, an activist. He's devoted his life's work to the field of second language acquisition, bilingual education, and reading. He has authored more than 500 articles and over 100 books. He has lectured all over the world, received numerous awards, and his contributions to the fields are way too many to list in my 2-minute presentation here. But his impact is undeniable. He's advanced our field, he's challenged it, and I think we can all agree that he's probably one of the most influential figures in our field. So without further ado, it is my honor and privilege to introduce to you Dr. Stephen Krashen.
Well, thank you so much. I'd like to begin. I'd like to begin by telling a story. In fact, all I really have to do is tell this story because it contains everything I want to say, the whole theory, etc. So what I'm going to do is tell the story, which is fairly interesting, and then I'll repeat it in a much more boring way, which is what you're supposed to do as a university professor. Okay. Here during the pandemic, my wife and I have been in quarantine for the last nearly 2 years. We've hardly left the house at all. I tell people I'm home alone with my girlfriend. We're having a great time. We've only been married 55 years, so it's still fresh and exciting. What we do, well, what I do is every Friday morning, I get up early and I go to the local supermarket because there's a time where you can shop for old people, only 65 and older, and I make that very easily now. The first time I went there, I got all my groceries, got in line, and I noticed the checkout clerk had his name tag on it, and his name said, his name is Fidel. And I actually heard him speak Spanish. So of course, I spoke Spanish to him. And of course, he answered me in English, which is what you're supposed to do on the job. So of course I was ready. I said, Fidel, tú puedes ayudarme, okay? Mi meta es hablar español como ustedes. I want to learn to speak Spanish the way you do. Por favor, hablamos español. He really liked that. That worked. And we started speaking Spanish. Now, Spanish is not my all-time best language. It's like number 4, number 5, depends on the time of day. But I really have a good time with it. And we established a nice relationship. Every Friday morning, I would speak Spanish to him. I'm getting better in Spanish, and I can tell. That's the only time I speak Spanish is with Fidel, okay, in that Friday morning. I've noticed he's speaking more quickly. There's less hablar and a little more charlar, okay, or is tending over into gossip. Who was it who said, if you don't have anything good to say about someone, come sit next to me? That was Theodore Roosevelt's daughter, Alice, okay? So we've been gossiping about people. And I'm getting better. I ran into a friend of mine who I've really hardly ever spoken Spanish to. She's Mexican American. And we spoke Spanish. And she said, Steve, your Spanish is so much better. What have you been doing? It's not from talking to Fidel. I talk to Fidel for maybe 3-4 minutes once a week. He's got other customers. He's got his job. He can't just, hablar conmigo all the time. So where's it coming from? Let me tell you what I'm doing. When I go home, I've been reading. I've been taking the advice of my colleague, Benico Mason, and I've been reading lots and lots of very easy Spanish. I've been reading graded readers. Graded readers are now literature. They're getting better and better. I have 2 favorite authors, one of whom you may have heard of. His name is Bill Van Patten, very interesting guy. He's been a professor, a researcher. He grew up with Spanish and he writes graded readers in Spanish. They're really interesting. The other, and I recommend her work, Adriana Ramirez. Adriana is from Bogota, Colombia, and she writes these wonderful graded readers. Oh my goodness. I did a workshop for her once a while ago, and she sent me a couple of her readers, and I really liked them and started reading them. I'll tell you about one of them. Here's the kind of story you get these days. A young man is in Bogota, and he goes for a walk. He's going to meet his friend at another hotel. He's from the United States, and his Spanish is not very good. He's had 2 years of grammar translation. He finds himself lost. He can't find the hotel. Okay, so he sees another young man, his helper. He says, can you help me, in his broken Spanish? He says where he wants to go. He says, sure, come with me. So they go together to the other hotel. On the way, they run into 3 gorgeous young women. See, this gets interesting right away. The young women come rushing up to his new friend, we'll call him the guide, give him hugs, hold his hand, kiss him on the cheek, and start a warm conversation. And their narrator's looking at what's going on here. Finally, they go their separate ways. And his guide says, I suppose you're wondering what's going on here. Because, he introduces the 3 young ladies to his new friend, and they give him hugs, and they're very warm to him too. He says, there's nothing going on. This is the way we are in Bogota. We're like this. By the way, 2 of these young ladies are my cousins. I have known them my whole life. The other one I met when we were in kindergarten together. There's nothing happening. This is the way we are. So what she managed to do, Adriana Ramirez, is tell an interesting story, get you excited, get you wondering, and again, give you the real story behind it, holding your interest. The whole novel is scenes like this. They're all fascinating. They're all wonderful. My point, these graded readers have become literature. They become something where they're so good, you forget that it's a story, etc. So I have now, the only Spanish I do is when I read graded readers, and I have been getting better, no question. And when I talk to Fidel for about 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes once a week. Let me tell you what I'm not doing. I'm not studying grammar. I didn't ask Fidel to correct my mistakes, okay? It's this short conversation, and all I'm doing is really going home and reading these books. It's the books that have made a difference. I read from one of them last night. I always have one by my bedside, and I'm getting better. That's the whole presentation. Thank you very much. Hope to see you. Oh no, I'll say some more. I'm going to restate the whole thing the way an academic is supposed to. I'm going to state some hypotheses, what we think is happening, and give you a little bit of the evidence. The first one, which you may have seen in class, is the acquisition learning hypothesis. And this says you have 2 ways of getting better in a language. You can acquire language and you can learn language. They're very different. Acquisition, we sometimes call the natural way. And a synonym for acquisition is picking up a language. I was in Iceland for 5 hours and I picked up some Icelandic, okay? That means you acquired it. You didn't study it, all right? And by the way, when you've acquired something, once you're done acquiring, you're not always aware anything has happened. You don't even know it while it's happening. It's subconscious. And once you've acquired something, you don't even know it's there. It may come out and surprise you. And it's a feeling for correctness. You don't always know the rule. The other process is learning. We are not very good at learning. We're very good at language acquisition. This is what we've learned in the last 40 years. We're very good at acquisition, not good at learning. Learning is knowing about language. When we talk about rules, when we talk about grammar, we're talking about learning, knowing about language. The subject and the verb are supposed to agree. When in phonics, when two vowels goes walking, the first does the talking. The S goes on the third person singular. This is conscious learning. We are not very good at conscious learning. We're slowly discovering this. We have backed the wrong horse in language education, okay? Correction is supposed to help learning. You make a mistake, someone corrects you, you're supposed to change your idea of what the rule is. So the limited English proficient child says, I comes to school every day. Teacher says, no, it's I come to school every day. The child is supposed to think, oh yeah, that S doesn't go on the third person, it goes on the, it doesn't go on the first person, it goes on the third person. That's what's supposed to happen in real life. That hardly happens at all. Again, we're not very good at language learning. This has been the big mistake we have made. Okay, next hypothesis. This one kept me very busy in the 1980s. It's called the natural order hypothesis, and it says we acquire language in a predictable order. Some things come in the beginning, some in the middle, some come late. In English as a first and second language, the progressive structure, John is playing the violin, that's early acquired. It's one of the first ones. The third person singular, every language teacher knows this, is late acquired. In first language, there could be 6 months to a year between the third person singular and the progressive tense. Very interesting. Wow. Let me give you some amazing facts about the natural order hypothesis. Number one, teachers, you know this. You can't change it. You can drill the third person singular for hours, but just like good wine, it will not be acquired until its time has come. You can't hurry it up. The order's there, you can't change it. Second, it's not simple to complex. The easy ones don't always come early. They can come very late. Third person singular, you think anyone who could, tie their shoes could get that right. It's so simple, at least to us linguists, very, very late acquired. A lot of difficult things are early acquired. Our syllabi are based on what seems simple and easy to us, to linguists. The mind is different. The language acquires mind is a very different idea. I remember I went to a conference in 1980. I tell people I gave a great presentation. It was standing room only. That's because there were only 10 chairs in the room and 15 people showed up, okay? And I made this great pronouncement. We have the natural order. Let's teach along the natural order. What could be simpler? Wrong. Not for the first time in my life, certainly not for the last time. The natural order is the result of language acquisition. It's not the teaching order. If you give people good input for language acquisition, the result will be the natural order, okay? So it's not the syllabus. Okay, next hypothesis, the monitor hypothesis. What do we use grammar for? What about grammar? Some people accuse me of saying, never teach grammar. Grammar is evil. Teach grammar, go to jail. No, I've never said that. My position on grammar is a little bit softer. It's hard. It's hard to teach grammar and get results. There are constraints, limitations on grammar. What do we use grammar for? Our hypothesis is By our, I mean me and 3 other people probably. Anyway, our hypothesis is grammar acts as an editor or a monitor. You're writing something you think may have gotten it wrong. You think of the rule, and then you correct it. Or when you're speaking, you stop, oh no, it's not I goes, it's I go. So it's a monitor. That's how it works. That's hard to do. 3 conditions have to be met if you want to edit yourself using conscious grammar. Number 1, you got to know the rule. We don't know the rules. The best teachers don't know all the rules. The writers of the grammar books don't know all the rules. Our students don't know all the rules. Okay, it's time for me to really name drop, okay? I did a webinar with Noam Chomsky. Can you believe that? That was so amazing. Noam Chomsky is still the true living master. Let me tell you, it was sensational. I loved it. Anyway, he said in the seminar, he said, we've only described fragments of English. And Chomsky himself, certainly knows more about English than anyone who has ever lived, everyone on this planet. His career has been based on careful analyses of English, thinking that if you get the best analysis, you will arrive at universal grammar. You'll get the right principles. Good strategy. And he says, nobody knows all the rules. We're never going to get there. It's much, much too complicated. The best linguists don't know all the rules. So this means it's impossible to teach through grammar. We don't know all the rules. Important footnotes. I've made the same argument with phonics, but we'll save that for another presentation, okay? So much for the science of reading. All right, now if we're not, when are these conditions met? When do we know the rule? When are we thinking about rules, which we can't do very well? And when do we have time to apply the rules? These are the conditions that must be met if you want to apply grammar rules. You got to be thinking about grammar, and that's hard to do. It's hard to think about grammar and think about what the other person's saying and what you're saying. It's kind of like patting your head and rubbing your tummy at the same time. Very unnatural. Number 2, you've got to be thinking about correctness, which means you're probably not listening. True confession time. I'll tell you what I used to do. I don't do it anymore. Plan my sentence while the other person's talking. Suicide. You come out with this perfect sentence, but you weren't listening. And the topic has changed. What you're saying now makes absolutely no sense. All right. You also need time to drag up the rule from your memory, time to put it in the sentence, make the changes. So if you want to use grammar, you got to know the rule, you got to be thinking about rules, and you got to have time to apply it. That never happens in real life. We never have that luxury. In class, it happens when we give students a grammar test. When you give students a grammar test, they're thinking about the rule, they've studied the rule, and they have time to apply it. Our studies back in the 80s, even when you give people grammar tests, they still don't apply rules very well. Even when these conditions are met, it's still not enough. This is tough. Well, if we're not going to acquire language through grammar, how do we do it? Let me give you a language lesson. Watch me on the screen, please. I'll give you a language lesson. I'll use a language you've heard before. Probably a couple of you speak, and some of you have studied, and you can tell me which of the 2 lessons you think is better. And please watch me on the screen. Lesson number 1. Wir werden jetzt anfangen, Deutsch zu lernen. Und ich möchte Ihnen voraussagen, dass nach meiner Meinung Deutsch ist eine sehr schöne Sprache. Und ich hoffe, dass Sie alle sehr viel Erfolg mit Deutsch haben werden. What do you think? Good lesson so far? You think if I talked to you like that, you'd eventually pick up German? No. How about if I repeated it? Would that help? No. How about if I said it louder? No. How about if I said it slower? Actually, that was pretty slow enough. That didn't help either. None of those things help. Let me now give you another lesson. Please watch the screen. Das ist mein Kopf. Kopf. Verstehen Sie das? Kopf, ja? Hier sind meine Augen. Meine Augen. Ich habe 2 Augen. 1, 2. 2 Augen. Und hier sind meine Ohren. Ich habe 2 Ohren. 1, 2. Und hier sind meine Zigaretten. Ja, meine Zigaretten. Ach, no. Ich habe keine Zigaretten. Zigaretten sind nicht gut. If you understood lesson number 2, not every word, but more or less, I did everything necessary to teach you German. We acquire language in one way and only one way, when we understand it. That's the whole hypothesis right there. We acquire language when we understand what we read or what we say, and we subconsciously absorb the grammar. Amazing facts. Number 1, the lesson I gave you to follow, no work. It was easy. Language acquisition is effortless. All you had to do was watch me make a few silly jokes, and you acquired some German. Okay. I used to say, you acquired a little German. Someone said, where is he? I don't see him. Anyway, so that's number 1, effortless. Number 2, language acquisition is involuntary. Given comprehensible input, you must acquire. Isn't that beautiful? If you understood a little bit of lesson 2, whether you like it or not, you just acquired some German. Chomsky says the language acquisition device is a mental organ. You can't turn it off by thinking about it. You can't decide to turn off your olfactory system. You can't decide to turn off your visual system if your eyes are open, okay? It's there and it always functions. That's why I said we are born to acquire language. We really have no choice. That's it. Okay, I want to produce a corollary to this. If this is true, talking is not practicing. Remember your first week as a teacher, ESL teacher, some of you, you were doing the right thing. You were in class and you gave this wonderful lesson. You told the students a story, good idea. And your supervisor walked in and he said, no, you shouldn't be talking. Your students should be talking. You were right. The teacher was wrong. That is, talking is the result of language acquisition. The problem, and writing as well, the problem is that talking not only doesn't help, but it can be kind of painful if you're not really ready for it. We call this forced speech, forcing students to talk before they're ready, where they have to rely on what they've learned, not what they've acquired, is extremely uncomfortable. There's studies that show this, and I want to, again, tell you a story. My daughter is one of the heroes of this one, and this took place well over 50 years ago. So now you know how old she is. She went to a neighbor's house. She was about 5 years old. Neighbor was 5 years old. She went to a neighbor's house to play. The mom next door was going to watch both kids. And I was supposed to go pick up both girls, bring them to our house, because our neighbor had to go take her Spanish class at the local community college. So I went over to pick up the girls, saying, okay, let's go. And the neighbor's mom said, wait, I've got to take my pill. Now, we were really good family friends, so I could be a little nosy. I said, take a pill? What's going on? Yeah, I have to take Valium. Now it would be called Prozac. That's the latest anti-anxiety medication. So she goes in the bathroom, takes a pill, comes back. Okay, we can go now. And of course, I said, what was that all about? She said, that was Valium. Why are you taking Valium? Again, we were very good friends, families. She said, it's Spanish class. It makes me so nervous. She actually said, Spanish class freaks me out. So even then, I was the researcher and I said, what is it about Spanish class that has you so nervous? When the teacher calls on me in class or giving a report or having to talk before I feel ready, I went and looked at the research. They said exactly the same thing, having to talk before you're ready. In fact, in the real world, people who know better don't worry about this. Wonderful paper done by an anthropologist named Sorensen. He visited a group in the Valpas River Valley in South America in this small area of 10,000 people. That's not very many. You go to a football game, there's only 10,000 people in the stadium. That's not a big crowd. In fact, it's embarrassingly small. 24 languages among 10,000 people. And they had this rule. You can't marry someone who speaks your own language, which I violated with my wife. Okay. We both speak English. What can you do? Too late now. Anyway, also, they had a rule that you can never correct anybody. Isn't that interesting? On anything. How did they acquire a language? They did a lot of language acquisition. They were very real polyglots. Kids growing up had to acquire mommy's language, had to acquire daddy's language, and the language of the local group and the neighborhood, and gradually more and more. How did they do it? They didn't start talking right away. Okay, they waited. They had what we call a silent period, and they waited till they felt ready. They did not practice speaking a language they didn't know well yet. They may make an occasional attempt, but if it doesn't come easily, they won't try to force it. Isn't that delicious? Doesn't that sound just wonderful, comfortable? Eugene Nido was one of my heroes when I was studying how to be an ESL teacher, and read his books. They were very good, still are. He wrote one book in which he said, I have been investigating polyglots in Africa, where people in one area in Africa work in a neighboring area and work alongside the people in the area, and they don't know the language, but they pick it up. Here's what he said, and I think these are wonderful lines. Instead of trying hard to learn the language, they seem to just take it for granted that after listening to the language long enough, they'd find they could hear it. That means to understand it. We just live there and listen. Before we know it, we can hear what they're saying. In the real world, in the outside world, not in language class, it can take a year or two before you can hear the language. We do a lot better. We do a lot better because we have something called language classes, where you can go in and get comprehensible input right away. You don't have to put up with all the incomprehensible input. So we've really made progress, I think. I want to talk about a little bit some of the conditions for language acquisition that input has when it really works. First of all, we have to understand language acquisition is gradual. I originally read about this in the brilliant research from colleagues at the University of Illinois in first language. Each time you see a word in context, let's talk about vocabulary for a moment, and it's comprehensible, you get some idea what it means. You don't get the whole thing right away, you get a little piece. And as you read it more, as you hear it more, it gradually fills out. And the word keeps coming back. If you get enough comprehensible input, you don't have to worry about forcing it in. So we get it by context a little bit at a time. There is a group of people who don't like context. They say, oh, don't trust context. Context can fool you. It can push you in the wrong direction. Here's their favorite example. Please look at the screen. You see something like this, okay? Someone holding his hand up, okay? Now, does that mean finger? Does that mean over there? Does that mean point? You don't know, but you get a little bit of it. And as you get more context, you gradually fill it in. They determine that about 2/3 of the time, context is helpful. Less than 10% of the time, it's deceptive, pushes you in the wrong direction. The rest of the time, it doesn't matter, okay? So you gradually, if you get enough input, you gradually acquire it. Should we be teaching along the natural order? Well, I just gave you a real powerful hypothesis. You have enough input, you don't have to. The natural order is automatically taken care of. The next vocabulary item, grammatical rule you need, we call this I+1, the next item. Enough input, it's there. Keep getting lots of input. You'll hear it, you read it. If this weren't true, we would never acquire language. It would be impossible, but it's all set up. I like to relate this to position with vitamins and diet. Some people say you got to go out and buy vitamins in the store, figure out what the next one is. Some of the nutrition people say, don't worry about it. Have good food with lots of variety, well prepared. The vitamins are there. The ones we've discovered, the ones we haven't discovered. And they come back again and again in an environment where you can more efficiently absorb them. Same idea. Well, let me now go to the hardcore application of this, and I'll tell you another story. I live about 35, 40 miles from Los Angeles, from the outskirts of Los Angeles. And for a long time, until recently, I was driving in to Los Angeles about twice a week. I had good reason. One is that I'm still addicted to my grandchildren. I had to go see them, and they lived in Santa Monica, still there. And I like stopping at the Santa Monica Library because my daughter worked there, okay? Also, I like to go to Venice Beach because I could pump iron on Venice Beach, which was a great place to do it. Don't do that anymore, but it was so much fun. So what do you do in the car? It takes a half an hour to get from my house to Venice Beach in Santa Monica. That's an hour twice a week, 2 hours in the car. What do you do? Well, the first thing I did is what you did. I listened to the radio. The news rapidly became nothing but Donald Trump, and I had had enough of that. So I stopped listening to the news. Then music. My college background, my undergraduate major was music history. So I like the grandmasters. I like the classical composers. I like to listen to Brahms, Haydn, Beethoven, the Bee Gees, the Beatles, all the classics. Guess what they did? They took all the good music, shifted it over to pay per listen stations. Take from the needy, give to the greedy. That is so awful. I stopped listening. What I did then is I started stopping at the Santa Monica Library, which was great, because I could see my daughter say hi. And then I discovered audiobooks in the library. In the Santa Monica Library, and I'm members of another library, I stopped at two of them, I started looking at the collections. Now, I'm a college professor, right? Major intellectual, okay? I should be listening to classics. They didn't have any classics. They had bestsellers. I should be listening to other languages. No, they only had English bestsellers. So I started listening to English bestsellers. I now know what you know. They're pretty good. In fact, a lot of them are excellent. The first bestseller, of course, you know what it was, Harry Potter. Fabulous. The reason it's great for us is it's all about education. The hero of one of them was Dumbledore, the headmaster. God, this is made for us, okay? And it's all about education, good classes, bad classes, good students. Harry was the star, and his friend, his best friend, Hermione, was star of many of them. And Hermione was always the good student raising her hand. One of my students in an essay in class wrote this great essay, Is Hermione smart? Is that the kind of student we want? So in other words, A.K. Rowling set it up to bring up some really important issues in education. Then it was the dark arts taught beautifully. Then it was the history of magic taught by a ghost, made incredibly boring. So all the things that we see in classes, over testing all the time, under testing. So the great issues were all through these novels. They were written for us, you guys. They were written for educators, no kidding. I started listening to other novels after that. I listened to all 7 Harry Potter. And what happened to me with Harry Potter and others happened to you. I would drive, get to my house, stay in the car until I heard the end of the chapter. You did that too, didn't you? You still do it, of course. These are pretty good. Authors are excellent. I read historical novels. I read romance novels. I read John Grisham's law novels, medical novels, or listened to them. And I learned so much from these books, okay? They're excellent. My conclusion from all this, the core concept I learned for pedagogy is, and I'll say the same thing in 3 different ways, literature, fiction, novels. That is a wonderful way of teaching language, in my opinion. Not the only way, okay? You can do subject matter, other things too, but fiction is a fabulous way. Let me tell you what we've been working with the last few years. At the beginning level, telling stories. I've been working with, TPRS does this, I've been working with Beniko Mason and her method called story listening. She developed it teaching in a university in Japan. English is a foreign language with somewhat older students. Grimm's fairy tales work beautifully. They're interesting. They have stood the test of time. She would study the story in advance, take an easy one for beginners. If she came to word that she was part of the story important, she wanted included, she would prepare what she called a prompter, rehearse a way of explaining this word, paraphrase her favorite method, draw a picture, and she made it clear to the students, don't try to remember this word, just try to understand the story. Our initial research on this has been replicated many times. You get more vocabulary this way. We compared listening to a story, when a hard word came, teacher made it clear, that's it, versus extra drills and exercises trying to reinforce those words. Much better, go on to another story. Don't worry, the important words, we call the frequent words, will come back, guaranteed. One teacher said to me, how do we make sure they get the frequent words? And my answer was, well, they're frequent. They're going to come back, okay? So this makes teaching so much more pleasant. ESL in beginning foreign language is story time. That's what it is. The studies have been done originally in first language development. They asked children in classes where there's lots of stories, read alouds, etc., what percentage liked being read to? 80, 90%. The ones who didn't like it were the ones where their parents didn't like it that much. So this is pleasant and it works and the research supports it, okay? Okay, that's stories. Now let's go on to reading, which is what I am incredibly thrilled about. I'll give you the commercial message first. This is going to make life so much easier for us and our students both. This is win-win. Let me tell you, I'm very excited, and it's more than just language. It's a gift that just keeps on giving. This, I think, is the breakthrough, not my research, the research of others, which I have discovered. What Dr. Mason began with, once they've heard a few hundred stories, a few hundred, did I say? Yes, a few hundred stories that are comprehensible. They're ready to start reading, 2 semesters, 3 semesters. The first day of reading class, Dr. Mason would come to class with big piles of graded readers, spread them out on the table. The students could select the ones they wanted. And they were told, you don't like it, put it down. Try it out, see if it's good. You like it, you can find it, etc. You can give it up. You don't have to finish every book. The same thing that we do. No quiz at the end. You're not tested on the contents. You don't have to write a summary in English or in the language, etc. All you have to do is help us keep a record, write down the name of the book you read. That's it. That's the whole class. The kids read and read and read. Now I'm going to make you jealous. Where she taught, the library had 5,000 graded readers in English. Wow. So they had an easy time selecting what they wanted. This is impressive to me. Let me tell you a little bit of the research. We did a study of this. Dr. Mason and I did this study a few years ago. It's in the handout. Some of the students wanted to know how good they're doing, and they wanted to take alternate forms of the TOEFL exam. Some of you know about the TOEFL. It's probably the most famous international test of English. And we then took their TOEFL scores. They shared them with us. And from their list of what they read, we could estimate how much time they put in reading over 2-3 semesters. The correlation between time spent reading and gains on the TOEFL was nearly perfect. The more they read, the more the gain. I'll give you the correlation coefficient for both of you who remember your statistics class, okay? 0.91, it was nearly perfect. Isn't this astonishing? Even more astonishing. For every class period, for every hour they read, they picked up a tiny bit, about half of a point on the TOEFL exam. I'm going to let that sink in. Wow. My extrapolation from all that, calculations on the handout, You do that for, you read for pleasure an hour or two a day. You're reading for pleasure. That's class. You're reading what you want to read, having a good time, which we do anyway. When they did that on the TOEFL test, they would go from near the bottom up to around 250, starting to read, nearly to 600, 700, 800. Tremendous progress. Major breakthrough. Okay, I'm going to go to other data to show you this is not just me talking. My former student, Fei Shin, was co-author of this study, and one of her colleagues, Dr. Lin, was one of the co-authors. They were working with this young lady, Sophia, who came to the United States as a limited English proficient and gradually, transitioned to fluent in English. The school that she went to, Sophia went to, gave the kids a test in reading comprehension in the fall, and then another test in the spring. So you had a test here and a test there. Can you see me do this? Okay. And you could see whether, actually, they were supposed to get better. Sophia got worse. During the year, she took a test in the fall and she got worse. Her score was lower. Then she would come back in the fall, in the next fall, take the test again. She went back up and got higher than she did the year before. Wow. What was she doing over the summer? She went to the local public library and was doing self-selected reading for fun. She read Nancy Drew. She read Sweet Valley High. She read all the books that kids like to read because she liked them. And her test scores went up. Dr. Lin, one of the co-authors, local professor, said, school isn't doing my daughter any good. She might as well stay home and just read. She'd do a lot of good. Well, that's true in that case. Other studies say the same thing. I'm just jumping through the research a little bit here. De Vries, I like his study because it's only 2 pages. Some classes had the regular 2 themes a week. These are native speakers of English, 5th graders. The others wrote essays. Who did better? The readers, who did absolutely no, one group did no writing at all. I got it wrong. One group did no writing. The other did 2 essays a week. The one that did no writing but read more did better. Sian Lee's study at her university in Taiwan, EFL class, advanced undergraduates and graduate students. The amount of reading you did on your own in English, not a predictor of the reading test. The amount, I'm sorry, I get this confused. I need more water. I need more coffee, really. The amount of reading you did was a good predictor of how well they wrote. The amount of writing was not. Study after study. Malcolm X Autobiography, fabulous book, beautifully written. He tells his life story. He grew up getting in trouble, hung out with the wrong kids, was involved in crime, was sent to prison in his 20s. In prison, he started reading and writing, became a brilliant writer and a spellbinding speaker. Never graduated college, never went to college, only had the little bit of high school, etc. He said a reporter once telephoned me asking questions. What is your alma mater? He said, books. He discovered the prison library. At night, when the guards came to check on you, he was under the cover, reading. He said, you couldn't have gotten me out of books with a wedge. And the result is obvious if you read what he's written and you have ever heard him speak. You can go home and read for free my best-selling novel, my best-selling book, The Power of Reading. It's there. That's because books are too expensive. Nobody can buy them. So you're welcome to look at all the research, tons of it. I've just given you little glimpses of it. People complain, well, if we just do reading for fun and fiction, will they get academic language? Yes, they do. Jeff McQuillan, fabulous research, available, open access. Those who do read more fiction, there's a lot of academic reading in the 7 Harry Potter books. You get lots and lots of academic words. You get more words than if you actually studied them. If you read books that kids like to read, again, Sweet Valley High, all those, you get a surprising amount of academic language. It's there. Rolls and Rogers, interesting study. If you do 1 year of pleasure reading of science fiction, you'll get all the academic vocabulary you need for all areas of science. I've often wondered about that with me. I don't really read hard science very much unless it's in linguistics, et cetera. I don't read chemical papers and papers about biology and anthropology. But when I do, I understand them pretty well. Science fiction. That's obviously where it came from. That's how I know all the scientific words, et cetera. It gets better and better, folks. Readers know more. People who read more know more about everything. And this is from reading fiction, okay? Studies there are very consistent. Stanovich and Cunningham, by far the most brilliant study, which is all-time study. They looked at college students and gave them, this is English as a first language, general tests of knowledge, kind of what you would like people to know when they graduate high school, history, social science, current events, et cetera. Who was Isaac Newton, for example, et cetera, who were great scientists, you recognize these names, what they knew about these things. Those who read more fiction knew more of this general knowledge that we want people to know. This was a predictor. Grade point average was not a good predictor. You don't know things because you've studied and you did well in school. You know things because you read a lot for pleasure. I'll give you my experience. I was on jury duty about 20 years ago. It was kind of a depressing, very depressing case, child abuse, all this. And the guy was, I thought, so guilty. He needed to be convicted. The judge actually told us, you convict this guy, we're not going to throw him in jail. He's going to get help, okay? One of the jurists decided, I just don't think he's guilty. I was the foreman. I didn't do anything about it. After listening to John Grisham, the runaway jury, I could have negotiated with the judge. I could have gotten that jurist replaced because it was only one person. And justice would have been served. The society would have saved a lot of money, and this guy would have gotten help, no question. Fiction does it for many of us. Okay. A couple of things. We've said it's good for you in terms of knowledge. It's good for you in terms of language. There's more. People who read more have better developed habits of mind. If you have read lots and lots of fiction, you have led other lives. You've seen how other people react. You know how people think. Noam Chomsky said this. Noam Chomsky said, we will probably learn more from novels than from scientific psychology about the nature of human beings and how they think. Wow. Barack Obama said the same thing. He was interviewed by The Guardian, British newspaper. He said, by reading fiction, what I've learned is empathy. He didn't read the research as I did. He got it from his own experience. I've learned I can get along with people, even though they seem to be very, very different. I can see what they're thinking about, etc. Wow, this really pays off. Now, the only way it's going to work, the only way it's going to pay off if people have access to books. Our major problem is making sure everyone has access to books. Children of poverty don't have access to books. And the way book prices are going up, nobody's going to have access to books the way things are going. Libraries, libraries, libraries. I will give you the major result of the most important person in the field of library science. I think he deserves a Nobel Prize for this. Keith Curry Lance, Lance. This is with public schools, native speakers. The better the school library in terms of collection, and if you have a qualified, certified school librarian, reading scores will be terrific. Reading scores will go up if you got a lot of books and you got a librarian there. He has seen this done. He has replicated it, etc. Okay, we need access. I want to close by emphasizing the importance of self-selection in all this. I mentioned it already. And I want to begin with my own history because it's the same as yours. When I was in secondary school in Illinois, I took language arts, took required English classes, English, American literature, British literature. Like you, I read the assigned novels. Like you, I took the tests, and like you, I passed the tests. I don't remember a single novel I read in English class in all of high school. If you remember more than one or two, I'm very surprised. But I remember everything I read on my own that was self-selected. I read two genres in high school, narrow reading. I read science fiction, Arthur C. Clarke, Robert Heinlein, etc. I read all their stuff. It was fabulous. Also, I read baseball stories written by a guy named John R. Tunis. I'll just tell you about one, kid from Tompkinsville. The hero of the story is 19 years old and is drafted to be on the Brooklyn Dodgers. It was the Brooklyn Dodgers in those days. And he's a pitcher. His first 19 games, he is untouchable. He wins all 19 games. Then he slips and falls in the shower, bangs his elbow. He can throw, but he can't throw the fancy pitches. His life is ruined. He comes back as an outfielder because he's a great hitter and leads the league the next year. This happens to him over and over again in novel after novel. A reviewer of John R. Tunis's book says the kid from Tompkinsville is the book of Job for boys. I learned so much. I got to tell you about my private life a little. My medical life is at Kaiser Permanente, a big medical plant here in Los Angeles. And my doctor there was Dr. Pearl, Seymour Pearl, for a long time. And when Seymour came in to see me, we started talking about baseball. He had read these books too. So when he retired, I ran into him at Kaiser. He's there with his wife. He said, "Mr. Krashen, may I call you Steve?" Okay, let's get together. I'd like to talk to you more. We've been getting together for the last 2 years. We've been meeting on Zoom lately. We've been talking about John R. Tunis's books. It's been wonderful, okay? This stuff is real literature. This stuff is about life as it's supposed to be led, mistakes, getting things right, back, etc. The reason I think that assigned reading is not the way to do it, a little bit from the research, but mostly my own experience, when someone gives you a book as a gift, someone gives you a book as a gift, do you read it? No. And you dread when the person comes up to you and says, "How did you like that book I gave you?" Okay. And you haven't even looked at it. Garrison Keillor talks about this. I have it on the handout. He says, as a former English major, I'm a sitting duck for gift books. And I've gotten Dickens, Thackeray, Smollett, Richardson, Keats, Boswell, all of them great. None of them ever read by me. All of them on my shelf, looking at me, making me feel guilty. We don't read gift books. We read the books. We find ourselves that get us interested. Now, there are exceptions. Nonfiction, I pay attention. One of my colleagues, Nishan Ashtari, gave me a gift book. And I'm in my field. It was great. She knew me. It was right. There is one person, when he recommends something on fiction or nonfiction, I read it immediately because he knows me better than I know myself. His judgment is better than mine, and that's my son. When he tells me, he says, I go off, he's always right, okay? But in general, it doesn't work. Donald Miller, language arts teacher, she says, no single practice inspires my students to read as much as the opportunity to choose their own books does. And I'd like to recommend one way of encouraging reading, because it costs nothing. I got this from an article in the School Library Journal. The article said, let your students take their pencil. When they come across a book they like in the library, encourage them to put a star in the inside cover. It's called the star method. Other kids will pick up the book and see it's got 15 stars. They'll get curious. Other people are going to read it. This is the way. There's one other I'd like to mention. It's called Spider-Man in the Library, high school. They took graphic novels, comic books did not allow them to circulate. You had to go to the library to read them. After 2 months, library traffic nearly doubled, and the amount of non-comic book material went up 60%. Okay, I'm done. I took too much time, but I'm ready for the first question. And if it's not the right one, I'll change it around. How's that? Who's in charge? Questions, okay?
All right, I'll jump in there.
Good,
So
thank
I'll
you.
start with the last question since it's relevant to what you were just describing. This question comes from Andrea. Do you think audiobooks are as effective as print books and digital texts?
Let me give you my answer because I'm such a well-known, competent, and famous researcher, therefore I know everything. I really don't know. I wish someone would do some research on it. I think they both work. I don't know which is better, but this is a wide open area with great, great potential. It's a wonderful, wonderful question. I'm anxious to see the answer.
Thank you. This one is from Gloria Zimmerman. What textbook do you recommend for absolute beginner adult ESL students?
I would recommend an easy graded reader. I would use Beniko's method and stories. There is no textbook. You don't want them to read a boring article by Steve Krashen and stuff. No, they don't need that. They need interesting fiction and stories. And my colleagues, our colleagues doing beginning foreign language ESL are starting to turn out some really good ones. Read a few, you'll like them. Try it yourself in another language. It really works, no question. Thanks for the question, good one.
Yeah, this comment is from Virginia Friedman. A lot of school libraries are moving to digital, and personally reading on a computer is less pleasurable. I guess what's your take on that?
Again, here's my profound answer from my years of study. I haven't the slightest idea. I know that people my age are less used to it, so we like the handheld book, but that can change. I'd like to interview kids, see what they're doing, see kids who've been successful with both. Once again, it's a wonderful, timely research question. 3 questions so far, and I don't know the answer to any of them. Good questions so far.
All right, here's another one. Do you think, oh, I already read this one. You emphasize the benefits of reading fiction. What's your view of narrative nonfiction? This one's from Michael.
It can work. Again, I don't know. Thanks, Michael. You got me again. I really don't know. If it's a captivating book, I think it's going to work. There's got to be one more question that hasn't been asked yet, so I'll ask it because I really want to answer it. Well, Professor Krashen, you've been doing this for nearly 50 years and you've been a major failure. I don't see any of this stuff happening in classes. If you look at the local community college catalog and you look at French 1, Spanish 1, it's the same old grammar stuff. Nobody's doing it. What do you have to say for yourself, huh? Well, perfectly right. There's good reason why this theory, this idea has not really been taken hold. First of all, nobody knows about it. It's buried in expensive books and journals and occasional lecture, okay? This is not the way to spread a theory. People have got to be able to read about it. And the books that it's in and the journals are, number one, phenomenally expensive and nearly incomprehensible. That's how you get a career. You be incomprehensible. There's the famous Dr. Fox study. Wait till I tell you about this. It's actually USC, my university did this, medical school. They decided to organize a series of lectures on medical education, and they asked a group of junior professors to do it. The professors are brilliant. They put together a script that was complete and utter It was all junk. And they gave the script to professional actors to read. One guy in specific, they called him Dr. Fox, who had played the role of doctors in movies. So people thought he was real medical. They had this kind of vague recognition. He's a doctor. And because he was an actor, he did a great job. He was pointing things out and overheads and vigorous and jokes and everything. But the lecture was complete nonsense. I was going to say bullshit, but I won't. Okay. It was voted the best lecture of the year. If you ask someone, what was that about? They wouldn't be able to tell you. So much of academia, I'm afraid, is sham. Not all of it. A lot of it's very good, but some of it is, we've got to watch out. What I've been doing about it, my contribution, and the books are too expensive. What I've been doing I've been trying to write short articles that are clear, and I'm publishing them in open access journals that are free to the reader, free to the writer, etc. And I've posted a lot of them on a website, sdkrashen.com, free download, share it with your friends. Many of my colleagues are doing this as well. Jeff McQuillan is doing this, writes great stuff. You can get it for free. He goes under the name Backseat Linguist. A lot of people are starting to do this. We have got to do it. Otherwise, our profession will never last. It's over. I personally cannot read a journal paper unless it's available for free, because I can't afford it. Nobody can. Every day I see 2 or 3 books I'd like to have, I'd be spending $200 a day just on books. Who can afford this? So this has got to change. The future of the profession is at stake. Free stuff, because it's for the common good for all of us. Okay.
Here's a question from Jessica. Where does poetry reading fit in?
Okay, let me talk about poetry in view of songs as a form of poetry as well, really the same thing. I think it's limited because you can't pump in a lot of language. Songs, we'll do songs. Let me recite to you the words of a popular song 20 years ago. These are all the words. This is why I'm hot. This is why. This is why. This is why I'm hot. This is why I'm hot. You ain't, because you not. This is why I'm hot. That was the #1 tune for a while. Not a lot of words there, okay? I got a lot when I was studying German poetry because I liked it so much, but I didn't get that many words from it. That wasn't a major source of my vocabulary. My major vocabulary from German came from reading lots and lots of easy, good, popular novels. So poetry and songs, okay, but limited. That's my answer.
Okay, here's one from Marianne. Should students use a dictionary while reading fun fiction?
I would try not to. What we want is for the fun fiction to be so interesting that you don't even want to look it up. Steve Kaufman, I regard Steve Kaufman as my language therapist, okay? He makes these wonderful suggestions. He's a polyglot, 20 languages. Listen to this, 20 languages, 6 of them after age 62. And he's good. I've been with him speaking 3 of these languages. Wow, he is wonderful. Here's what he says. When I'm reading and I come to a word I don't know, if I look it up, by the time I get back to the text, I've forgotten it, okay? That made me feel a lot better. So you don't have to look up every word all the time. And Kaufman, I think, said just the right thing. So not always.
Okay, and this one's from Alice. It's about pronunciation. Do you think students will stumble over wondering about the pronunciation of words that they're acquiring while reading?
Let me first change the question to ask where pronunciation comes from. How do we get a good accent? Here's a hypothesis I've been sharing with my colleague, Nushan Ashtari, and been writing about it. I think accent is a marker of who you are, your club membership. Pronunciation rarely gets in the way of communication, very rarely. The moment you open your mouth, people know where you are, what your attitudes are, etc. That's what it's in. It's a marker of what Frank Smith would call club membership. We have better accents, we don't use them. I'll tell you one story that started me thinking about this a long time ago in the 60s. I was teaching in Ethiopia, okay? And I met this guy, worked for the British Embassy. He told me a story of what happened to him in secondary school. In secondary school in London, he took French. Traditional message, traditional pedagogy, all this stuff. He hated French, he hated the instructors, he hated everything about it. And he had to take an oral exam in front of 3 of his instructors, which is torture for a teenage boy, okay? he decided he would make fun of them. He dressed up in what he thought was French. He had a beret, a little sweater, and he had a glass of a dark liquid, which he pretended was wine. And he exaggerated what he thought was a French accent. He said, "Ah, bonjour mes amis, je suis très content d'être ici avec vous aujourd'hui. Comment ça va, mes amis?" And they gave him an A+. They said, "Wow, you're really doing well. Why didn't you do that in class?" He thought he was making fun of them. What this means to me, the good accent is there. It's inside of you. You don't use it because you're not a member of that group. It's a marker of club membership. We pick up accents rapidly, quickly, and quite well. We just don't use them, and for good reason. I saw an interview with Peter Ustinov, who was well-known British actor, wonderful actor, my goodness. He was well-known for his ability with different languages, dialects, etc. And if you see him in a French movie, you think he's French. He said, "I really sound good," and he does. He says, "I can't do that when I'm speaking to someone from France. I have an accent because it's a marker of club membership, and I have the feeling I'm pretending to be someone I'm not." So I think our whole theories of accent are upside down. It doesn't matter if you make mistakes when you're reading, just read the words, get the meaning, don't worry. Glad you asked that, thanks.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to finish with this comment from Kelly, and this is not a question, but I think it shows what so many of us are feeling right now. She says, "Kelly Kennedy, thank you so much for this. I've studied your theories throughout graduate school and beyond. It's surreal and wonderful hearing from you." So thank you so much for your time tonight. Thank you all for attending. If you want to unmute and clap for Dr. Krashen, feel free to do that. I'm going to...
Oh, thank you very much. Very nice. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay,
I hope you enjoyed.
I have a
Oh,
request.
sure.
I want you to help my career, okay? Please consider following me on Twitter. On Twitter, I am S. Krashen. I want to catch up to Justin Bieber, who's been ill lately. I want to make him feel a little bit better, okay? Because Twitter's very interesting. A lot of good stuff happens on Twitter. I post the latest research results. You'll see Jeff McQuillan's results, a lot of other good things. So check that out. Check out Twitter for a source of keeping up with the field. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you for your hospitality.
Thank you.
And